We need to have a conversation about Electron. I see it getting so much hate, and I'll be real, it doesn't deserve most of it. Electron as a technology isn't just important, it's actually pretty good. And I think these misconceptions about how Electron is used and the bad Electron apps we've all experienced have resulted in a negative sentiment that just isn't fair. I want to take the time to break this all down and do the thing you're all going to flame me for, defend Electron. Because my life is way better as a result of Electron's existence, and yours is too, especially you Linux users. Y'all need to shut up. But before I explain why, we need to hear quickly from today's sponsor. Are you tired of waiting around for your builds? Today's sponsor, Blacksmith, is certainly going to help you out there. There's never been a better way to build your code on GitHub. Yes, even better than GitHub Workers. And I mean it. It's literally one line of code to change over from a traditional GitHub worker over to using Blacksmith. And the results are insane. You get way more cache, 25 gigs instead of 10 gigs of cache. You get 4x the network speeds accessing that cache and getting other things online, 40 megabit per second instead of 100. Your actual code runs faster, up to 2 times faster than GitHub runners. It's way cheaper. It's hilarious. And it's not like this is some weird side project. There are a lot of real companies and real projects building on Blacksmith today. An app like PostHog, another wonderful channel sponsor here, has cut their build times down from 8 minutes and 38 seconds down to 1 minute 27 seconds just by moving over to Blacksmith. And it is almost 1/10 the price for them. How crazy is this? It's not just for us JS devs either. You see projects that are all real native here handling it great too. Man, their Docker builds are nuts. The way they handled storage makes them up to 40 times faster. And this obsession with performance exists at every layer in their whole system. They've built their own caching layers for Go, Node, Python, Ruby, even Zig. Chances are, if you're deploying real code, Blacksmith will make it deploy, build, test, and everything else way faster. Thanks again to Blacksmith for sponsoring. Check them out today at soydev.link/blacksmith. I'm going to do my best to structure this, but this one's going to go all over the place. I'll warn you in advance. Defending Electron. I'm going to try to break this into 3 parts. Part 1 is, what is Electron? Part 2 is, why does it suck? Part 3 is, why is everyone wrong about it? Cool. Without further ado, do you know how Electron started? And I'm actually very curious how many of y'all have any idea how Electron initially was started. Most of you guys don't. This will be a fun history lesson. For those of y'all who are younger, you probably don't remember Atom. Atom was a huge shift in the IDE space. Before Atom, there wasn't really one editor of choice. Basically, everybody was switching between things. A lot of people were on Sublime Text. A lot of people were on crazy custom configs and JetBrains. A lot of people were trying and failing to make Vim work, because NeoVim hadn't really caught on yet. Atom was a really big shift in how IDEs were built. If you couldn't tell by the Octocat floating around here, Atom was actually created by GitHub. They made it because they wanted a better editor with better Git flows and integrations, and most importantly, extensibility. But all of the devs working on this at GitHub were front-end devs building user interfaces and experiences in the browser. They only really knew web tools. Nobody at the company knew how to build good native apps, much less build a good native app for Windows, Mac, and Linux. They had no idea how to move forward. But they realized they could build a pretty good editor in the browser. But the browser is not where people want to edit code. And on top of that, a lot of people who wanted to make things like plugins for it didn't know native languages. And if you had to make your plugin for Atom for Linux, Mac, and Windows all separately, you're dead in the water. They picked a very interesting solution. They created a stripped down shell of Chrome so they could build the editor in that, ship it as a desktop app using web technologies. The result was an editor that didn't feel too great. I'll be real. Atom was not a fast experience as a dev, especially if you were used to tools like Sublime Text that were super optimized and flew. Every time you pressed a key, you'd see the response immediately. But the extensibility aspect was very real, and Atom got a ton of love. Sadly, Atom is over, as is called out on the top of this page, but its legacy is not. Because Atom, in developing that Chrome shell, realized that could be useful for other things. And since Atom was also one of the first fully open source modern IDEs, that shell got ripped out, and that shell is now known as Electron. Yes, Atom, because atoms are like the things that matter is made up of, and electrons and neutrons and protons are the parts. Electron was one of the parts from Atom. That's where the name came from. Electron is one of the things that went into building Atom, and it has long since outlived. Another really interesting thing happened that almost feels like a video of its own which is VS Code. Microsoft has some of the best IDE devs in the world. Whether or not you like building on Microsoft systems, Visual Studio is a really powerful piece of software. Those IDE teams are incredible at what they do. They saw what Atom was doing, and while obviously they didn't think it was particularly great quality-wise, the potential of a simpler editor with an extension platform that any JS dev could contribute to was super promising. It was so promising that they spun up a project internally to explore building an editor in similar tools. They ended up also going with Electron, but because they had, I'll be frank, much better devs at Microsoft than there were on GitHub working on this, VS Code was able to become one of the best editors ever made, so much so that now these forks are raising tons of money. VS Code proved that Electron wasn't the problem with Atom. And this is going to be an important theme as we go along, because there are plenty of Electron apps that used the experience that Atom created to make things way better than Atom. So that's the history. Obviously, since then, Electron has grown massively. 115,000 stars on GitHub. I think it's in the top 10 most starred projects, probably even top 5. It's used for all sorts of things. What are the most popular apps using Electron? Slack, Discord, Teams, WhatsApp, and Skype, all in Electron. Visual Studio Code, Atom, GitHub Desktop, Postman, all in Electron. Figma, Notion, Obsidian, and WordPress Desktop, all Electron. 1Password, Bitwarden, Tidal, Twitch, all also Electron. The Twitch desktop app's been deprecated for a long time, but yeah. Electron took over. And there's a lot of reasons for it. This might have to be multiple parts. 1.5, why did it get popular? This is honestly kind of a simple point. Electron got popular because it lets you build software quickly for the web and every desktop platform with one simple code base. That was awesome because the people you hired to build your website can now make meaningful changes to the desktop apps for every platform. And a lot of companies were able to start shipping desktop apps that otherwise might not have been able to. That was really, really cool to see. But it came with costs. This article was posted by Daring Fireball back in 2018. Electron and the Decline of Native Apps. This isn't about Chrome, this is about Electron. And in case it wasn't clear, Electron is a stripped down Chrome shell. So you probably on your computer right now have 10 of the same Electron shell just in multiple different apps because they can't share those parts. They all have to download the whole thing. So you probably have more than 10 instances of Chrome on your computer right now because of this. One of the many costs that we'll get to. Microsoft thinks Edge HTML cannot get to drop-in feature parity with Chromium to replace it in Electron apps, whose duplication is becoming a significant performance drain. They want to single-instance Electron with their own fork. Electron is a cancer, murdering both macOS and Windows as it proliferates. Microsoft must offer a drop-in version with native optimizations to improve performance and resource utilization. This is the end of desktop applications. There's nowhere but JavaScript. I don't share the depth of pessimism regarding native apps, but Electron is without question a scourge. I think the Mac will prove more resilient than Windows because the Mac is a platform that attracts people who care, but I worry. Let me see how many Electron apps I've open right now. And I don't keep a lot of apps open. Arc's Electron, Curse's Electron, Notion's Electron, Ghosty isn't, Finder isn't, Preview, Affinity isn't, Legcord absolutely is. Half of the apps I've open right now are Electron, so I'm sorry. 6 years later, you're wrong. In some ways, the worst thing that ever happened to the Mac is that it got so much more popular a decade ago. Wait till you hear about the M1s, man. In theory, that should have been nothing but good news for the platform. This is mostly focused on Mac and how bad Electron apps are with Mac and how Mac developers and Mac users expect more. There have always been bad Mac apps, but they seldom achieved any level of popularity because Mac users collectively rejected them. Word 6.0 is the canonical example. Word 5 for Mac was a beloved app and a solid Mac citizen. Word 6 was a cross-platform monstrosity. Mac users rejected it, and its rejection prompted Microsoft, at the height of its mid-90s power and arrogance, to completely rethink its Mac strategy and create a new business unit devoted entirely to the Mac. Microsoft's Rick Schott wrote a terrific piece on the whole saga. They spent so much time trying to solve the bugs that they never made the UI good, is the summary there. The fun tangent here is that even though Word 6 wasn't very Mac-like, it's still far more Mac-like than using Google Docs inside of Chrome. Google Docs on Chrome is an un-Mac-like word processor running in an even more un-Mac-like web browser. What the market flatly rejected as un-Mac-like in '96 was better than what the Mac market tolerates seemingly happily today. You have no idea how far it's gone. It's also fun because Apple is shipping worse and worse apps too. The quality of software for desktops has been going down. I absolutely agree there. But it doesn't support page up and page down on the official Mac App Store. Does it now? Because I know they read his posts so much that anything he says, Apple's going to deal with. So page up, page down work now. Anyways, the point here is that Electron apps are bad and don't feel like Mac software at all because they're multi-platform. They're meant to be the same everywhere, but Mac apps should feel like Mac apps, and this is going to suck forever. People were upset, and they've only gotten more upset since. So I guess this is where we should dive deeper into part 2. Why does it suck? There's a couple reasons. Obviously, we just talked about the native aspect. It's not native feeling. The problem with that is if you're used to Mac apps feeling a certain way or Windows apps feeling a certain way, Electron apps will not feel the same at all. Even between different Electron apps, they might feel entirely different. Like some of them put things properly in the menu options up here. Some of them just don't use these at all. Some of them have menu bars that are hidden. Some have menu bars that work the way old Mac apps used to. All of these apps are different, and none of them feel quite like we're used to with a native Mac app. So the lack of native feeling is absolutely a thing that sucks about Electron. There's also performance. As we all know, JS is slow. Thereby, using JS to build your desktop apps is slow, and they're going to be terrible. Why would you ever use this? The other important thing is that companies can ship worse stuff faster. Because Electron allows them to send a web page instead of just a binary, you can constantly change out that web page, and it makes software more fragile, which is also worth calling out here too. Resulting software is buggier and less reliable overall. These are all the things that people understandably see as concerns with Electron. And now when an app doesn't perform well, they assume that the reason is because Electron sucks. And I understand. I can somewhat sympathize with why people would think these. But of these concerns, 2 are kind of valid and all of them are overblown as hell. And here is where you guys are going to start getting mad. And I know it. I am already scared of this comment section. It is what it is. Why you're all wrong. Let's go through these in order. Not native feeling. What's the problem here? Why does this not matter? The reason, nothing is anymore. If you've tried any of Apple's new pieces of software, God, go try Journal out. I'm not saying Journal's bad, to be clear. I'm just saying it doesn't feel native. Or all the things that we just saw in that article, the Daring Fireball article. Even new Apple software doesn't have basic native functionality that you would expect. Native software feel, where you feel the OS as much as you feel the app, is over. And I think that's a good thing because the way Mac feels hasn't improved for 10 years. The only improvement I've had for my experience on my Mac for the last decade has been the processor. Everything else has been the same or gotten worse. Don't get me started on the new notifications and permission system in recent Mac releases. It is garbage. Native feel means literally nothing now because the native software is worse than a lot of the software we use on the web. And the web gives you the flexibility to make software of different quality levels. So let's do part 2 on that note. Performance. Bad apps are bad everywhere. We need to break down the different types of creators really quick. Creators of software, to be clear. There are the people who care a lot, and there are the people who don't. The harsh reality that most of y'all don't want to accept, and I understand because it took me a while, is that most people are the latter. I would guesstimate maybe 5% of devs care a lot about the quality of what they're shipping. The rest just want their paycheck. And these people, they're not the ones watching videos like this. They're not the ones trying out new tools and frameworks. They're not the ones researching to make sure they pick the right solution for the job. They're the ones that Google, how do I make a desktop app? The first result that comes up is what they go use. I think we can also all agree, and this will piss some people off, I don't care, that the quality difference between these two types of people is meaningful. I'm not saying that just because you don't care about software dev doesn't mean you're not a good dev. I'm saying it's much less likely you're a good dev versus somebody who does care a lot, which means at a certain level of popularity, the people who don't care start to use the thing. And this is what I think happened to Electron the same way it's happened to React, to the web, and to so many other things, is when it becomes popular enough, this gigantic mass of people who don't know what the fuck they're doing start to use the tool. And the harsh reality is that Electron is the tool for those people. If you don't know how to build software and you don't really care to figure it out, and you go look at how the desktop apps you use are built, You see they're all in Electron, you go use it. It doesn't matter if you use Electron or if you use Tauri or a native solution or React Native or go build in a Swift UI. These people build worse software. And the fact that builders who suck pick Electron doesn't mean Electron itself is bad. It means the developers are bad. And when we talk about how miserable an app like Discord is, and then you see a 17-year-old kid intern there and fix a third of the bugs in 3 months, it emphasizes just how incompetent the devs there are. And I hate saying that because I know a couple people who are really good at Discord, but I know even more that have quit because it sucks. It's such a shit show. I don't even use the native Discord app anymore. I use Legcord, which is an open source fork. It's not really a fork because it's their own Electron wrapper for Discord, because the web app is more stable than the desktop app because the desktop app blows chunks. It is so egregiously bad that I can sympathize with the people who blame Electron for it, because there is no reason Discord should be as shit as it is. I want to make sure that we really understand this point before we go further. If you have a pie, this pie can be split in multiple different ways. If we were to split this pie for desktop apps via Electron and not Electron, I'll be generous here. I'll say that this side is Electron and this side is everything else. Electron is what's being used by the majority of these things. Now let's make a different pie. Every dev pie. We split a little different. I'm going to curve this more like that. Great developers. Everyone else. The point I'm making here is if we look at this pie, we compare the number of great devs compared to all of the less great devs. We look at this pie, Electron, everything else. There is pretty much no way that we can overlay this that doesn't hurt. So if we take this and we overlay it, remember, the small chunk is the great devs. There is pretty much no way we can rotate this where we don't have a bunch of shit devs using Electron. Even if theoretically all the greatest devs were using Electron, you still have a ton of shit devs using Electron. There's literally no way to rotate this that doesn't result in a shitload of bad devs using Electron. If your thing is popular enough, this is going to happen. If you're bragging and saying every Swift app is faster than every React app, what you're actually saying is our framework isn't popular enough for bad developers to use it yet. And that's not an argument against the tech. That's an argument for the tech. The fact that there's a shitload of bad Electron apps shows how successful Electron is. And I'm tired of people blaming Electron when what's actually happening is that this percentage of shit devs happens to be in that pool a large portion of the time. We need to be realistic about this. Doesn't matter how we turn it. The bad devs are using Electron because there's more Electron devs than there are good devs, period. That's just reality. So we can't blame the tech. There is no tech that is broken out of this cycle ever. We're only a part of this performance thing, though, because there's also a ton of misconceptions. And I'm going to make another one of those bold statements that's going to piss a lot of people off. A lot of the time, Electron is actually going to have a better and faster experience for users than a native app would. Go ahead, burn me at the stake. I'm just going to show you real numbers here. It's hard to build a performant Swift UI app. If you're not familiar, Swift UI is the new native UI kit for building applications on macOS and iOS. Ironically, most native ChatGPT apps struggle to render real-time chat messages, something that the web-based solutions like Electron can do easily. Embarrassing, I know. I did a quick benchmark for a few popular AI chat apps, and almost all of them reach 100% CPU real quick, including OGs like MacGPT. Bolt AI is not an exception. This developer made Bolt AI, which was originally a native app. The earlier versions of Bolt AI reached 100% CPU when the message text was longer than 2,000 characters. 100% CPU utilization for 2,000 characters. The fuck? That's like, is this Electron? That's so bad. The reason is simple. All state updates happen in the main thread. So the faster the stream, the more CPU cycle needed. So you can throttle the UI down to 60 FPS. Swift UI's text component is inefficient. Updating its contents trigger expensive relayouts. Markdown rendering is also expensive. So the solution to these problems is you switch to the text editor instead of the text component, and you disable markdown viewing for real-time messages entirely. These two improvements were able to reduce CPU down to 36%, but it's still not the same performance of a web page, especially once you start scrolling. In version 1.12, this developer completely changed the underlying implementation and moved to JS Core plus CSS for the rendering, and now it's way faster. Even for a large amount of text and with live markdown rendering, it tops at 34% CPU and scrolling at 60 FPS. Super happy with the latest release. You guys need to understand something. You are not better at rendering text than the Chromium team is. These fuckers have spent decades making the world's fastest method for rendering documents across platforms, because the goal was to make Chrome as fast as possible regardless of what machine you're using it on. Electron is cool because we can build on top of all of the efforts that they put in to make Electron, and specifically to make Chromium, as effective as it is. The results are effective. The fact that you can swap out the native layer with SwiftUI with even just a web view, which is like Electron but worse, and the performance is this much better, is hilarious. Also notice there's a couple more Electron apps he has open here, including Spotify, which is only using less than 3% of his CPU. Electron apps don't have to be slow. In fact, a lot of the time, a well-written Electron app is actually going to perform better than an equivalently well-written native app, because you don't get to build rendering as effectively as Google does. I know technically Spotify isn't Electron anymore. They have their own weird CEF fork. It is what it is. You get the point. It's still Chromium. So I, at this point, just don't buy the performance argument. There's a lot of cases where if you really care about performance and native pipes, like you want to do a native like GPU render for a game engine, you're building an editor for that. There's a lot of these types of things where Electron doesn't make a lot of sense. I understand. I get it. But performance, more often than not, for the types of apps people are complaining about, the reason the Electron app is slow has nothing to do with Electron and everything to do with the shit devs who are building it. So let's go on to point 3. Companies can ship worse stuff faster. They wouldn't have shipped at all. The moment that I realized how down bad the Electron haters were was when I realized how many of them were Linux users. As a recovered Linux user, I grew out of it like most of y'all should. One of my favorite things ever was when Electron started to get popular. To think companies without Electron would suddenly start rebuilding their apps in Qt and in GTK for all the Linux users and all their crazy preferences is just, I'll be frank, it's delusional. It's not going to happen. That's not the world we live in. Now also imagine the fact that we're moving from X server to Wayland. Do you know who is going to put the effort in? The Chromium team. Do you know who's done a great job of making sure their runtime works and performs well in Windows, Mac, and every flavor of Linux? The Chromium team. Now, for the first time ever, I can build a good Mac app on my Mac using all the tools I'm used to building with, run one command, and now you have a binary you can use on Linux. And it's the exact same experience for the users. That is incredible. It is so cool that for the first time ever, we're actually getting real software on Linux. So much so that Google themselves built a Linux machine that is quickly taken over in elementary and middle schools, the Chromebook, because Chrome is now in and of itself powerful enough to run on a crappy Linux computer and give you access to all the tools you'd ever realistically need. The web and the web platform have gotten so efficient and capable that with it, Linux has too. We may not be in the year of the Linux desktop right now, but it will literally never happen if we leave Chromium and Electron behind. These are essential pieces to making Linux a viable platform. The only reason I could actually daily drive on my Linux framework machine for a few days was because these tools have gotten as good as they are. Even the ones that don't have a desktop app, you can just use them in Chrome and they're fine. And there's community people building their own wrappers around the website using Electron that are making great experiences too. It's hard for me to comprehend how people who want Linux to be successful can also hate on Electron. There is no world in which Linux succeeds and Electron fails. These two technologies should be seen as complementary. And the fact that the Linux community, I shouldn't say the community, there are so many great people in the Linux world that understand this and are actually hyped about Electron, but the ones who don't get it, the non-devs that hang out in the Arch Linux forums and shit on you for using a Mac, those people are a scourge and no one should treat them with anything resembling respect. And those people coming after Electron constantly saying Google is evil and destroying the entirety of software, they don't actually want software to be better. They just want to feel right. And fuck all of them. Don't listen to them for anything. They are the ones who have pushed and proliferated this idea that Electron is the problem. They are useless. Don't listen to them. And that's just talking about Linux, by the way. We haven't even considered the fact that you also have a Mac app and a Windows app, and now they can both be decent. That is crazy. It's so cool we're now at a point that like Mac and Windows users can use the same program at the same time and have the same experience. That I can tell somebody who's using Windows what button to press, and it's the same button in roughly the same place for them as it is for me. And now as a dev using a Mac, I can ship Windows software. A dev on Windows can ship Mac software. The fact that we can all work together in this way, and we can make apps that are not just as performant as before, but sometimes even better than the native counterparts. That's not just kind of cool. That's literally magic. Electron as a technology has enabled us to build faster and better software that it's not like we would have built it in other things otherwise. It just wouldn't have existed. There wouldn't be a ChatGPT desktop app if we didn't have something like Electron. There wouldn't be a good Spotify player if we didn't have something like Electron. There wouldn't be all of these awesome things we use every day. All these apps I use. Notion could never have existed without Electron. VS Code and now Cursor could never have existed without Electron. Discord absolutely could never have existed without Electron. All of these apps are able to exist and be multi-platform and ship and theoretically build greater and greater software as a result of using this technology. That has resulted in some painful side effects, like the company's growing way faster than expected because they can be adopted so easily. So they hire a bunch of engineers who don't know what they're doing and the software falls apart. But if they had somehow magically found a way to do that natively, it would have happened the same exact way. This has nothing to do with Electron causing the software to be bad and everything to do with the software being so successful that the companies hire too aggressively and then kill their own software in the process. But the killer for Discord, if in the future Discord is eventually usurped and somebody builds something genuinely better, I'll bet my ass it's going to be an Electron too. And I guess that's actually my fourth point too. The software being built in Electron isn't buggy because Electron is buggy. It's buggy because there's more devs doing more things for more platforms at the same time. And the result is that more code is shipping and more bad things happen. My bet would be that if you took an Electron app and a nearly identical native app, the Electron app has less code. But if you took two random apps, one random native app and one random Electron app, the Electron app will have much more code simply because the Electron app has more people working on it, shipping more features more aggressively. The timelines for these things can move much faster. It is hard to ship fast on technologies that don't take advantage of web platforms and standards. As a result, the people whose goal is to ship fast and capture markets as quickly as possible tend to lean towards Electron. Those goals are not aligned with quality software experiences. Electron has nothing to do with that. If the business's goals and incentives don't push them towards making better software, they won't. Electron is not an incentive. It's not a reason. It's just a tool. The people wielding it are wielding it to achieve their goals, and those goals not being aligned with you as a user is something worth complaining about. If you were to complain about Discord's performance on Twitter, and the complaint was, I feel like Discord keeps getting new features that nobody wants, the app is getting buggier every day, whenever I open it, it has an update, I'm hating Discord more and more because the quality of experience is trash, we are perfectly aligned. I couldn't agree more. But the moment you say, wow, Electron sucks, at the end of it, you've just lost the plot. You're not talking about a thing you understand if you think that's the case. If you actually think Electron is the reason that Discord on desktop sucks, you don't understand Electron, Discord, business incentives, or basic software development. Straight up. And that's why I get so annoyed about this, because I am genuinely beyond tired of people who don't know jack shit about how web applications and software development work, commenting on these things because they set up a Linux machine 3 years ago, so they think they're cool. It's tiring at best. And I hope this video does its part in shutting this down.
Okay, so the video you're watching right now about Electron is one I recorded a little bit ago. Sorry to spoil it. I record my videos live and they come out when they're ready. We have a lot of them. The reason that you're seeing a clip from an entirely different day right now is because one of my favorite performance-focused JS devs here, Canada Honk, just said, Electron is so overhated. And I want to emphasize something important here. Every single performance-focused JavaScript dev that actually knows what they're talking about believes that Electron is getting more hate than it deserves. It absolutely does. And Canada is an absolute legend. They're the creator of Test262 FYI, which is the go-to test runner to figure out what features are and aren't supported by every different JavaScript engine, including their own engine, Porphyr, which is an ahead-of-time JS compiler. There are a few people more qualified to say that Electron gets more hate than it deserves than they are. Huge shout-out, as always, to Canada Honk, one of my favorite people in the community. Thank you for stopping by.
That said, we should talk about alternatives to Electron because there are a decent number of them, and they're also even more misunderstood. We'll start with everyone's favorite banned word, Tauri. Tauri is a banned word in my chat on Twitch and YouTube, and it's banned for a reason. Usually when people bring it up, it's the specific demographic of people that I don't want to hear from because they don't have anything to add. Tauri is an alternative to Electron in the sense that it lets you write JavaScript code that is a desktop app, but it is fundamentally different in the sense that it is trying to get you to write Rust code. Electron has an incredible ecosystem of tools and solutions to bridge the TypeScript layer running on your system to the TypeScript layer running in Electron. So if you want to read from the file system, you want to access device APIs, those types of things, there's a whole ecosystem of packages and solutions that admittedly vary in quality, but there's a lot of stuff there. In Tauri, the expectation is you write it yourself in Rust. And that is totally fine and cool if you're building a Rust application. If you're a Rust dev building a crazy Rust native tool and you want to build the UI for it quickly, Tauri is almost certainly the best way to add a good UI to your Rust app. Because as we discussed before, these JavaScript-based frameworks and rendering engines are actually really, really fast. So if the slow part is using TypeScript to parse your file system, maybe rewriting that part in Rust or starting from that part in Rust and then using the JavaScript for the thing it's fastest at, which is the rendering aspect, could actually result in something pretty good. It's also not Electron-based, it's JSC-based, so it's using a different JavaScript engine and things, so it's a little bit smaller and lighter, but it's also less reliable and stable as a result. And since there isn't this ecosystem of packages, it's pretty hard to build a good Tauri app without just writing a bunch of Rust code. I've tried and failed multiple times now, and don't get me started on the mobile side. It will get there eventually. That said, if you are a Rust dev building Rust software and you want a good UI for it, I actually would say use Tauri. It's really awesome for those types of things. But that's never why people are bringing it up. They're bringing it up because Electron is so slow and terrible. Why don't you just use Tauri? Because I'm not a Rust dev. I'm not trying to build Rust software with a UI. And that's what this is. It's a thing you staple onto your Rust app to give it a good UI. And it's really cool for that. The other option, and this one I'm a little more bullish on, is React Native. You might think of React Native as the thing you use on your phones to have crappy phone and mobile apps. They're not that crappy anymore. If you want proof, go use Blue Sky. It's way faster and more stable than Twitter, which is native. React Native now has some interesting additional packages. We see here React Native Windows. This is, by the way, official Microsoft package because even Microsoft now admits that the dev tools for building Windows software are trash. And instead of pretending they can fix it, they're building better things on top, including but not limited to Windows Subsystem for Linux, which lets you just run a Linux terminal and shell inside of your Windows machine. And now React Native for Windows, which is a layer built on top of the universal Windows platform so that you can write code that doesn't suck on top of it, in this case with React Native. Microsoft maintains it because they realize that React Native needs to save them from the hell they've carved themselves. And now with modern Windows, there's actually a lot of things using it, and not just random apps. Big ones that are important. Things like Outlook and the calendar are all using React Native for Windows now. And even crazy native stuff, like most of the Xbox's UI is now built in React Native, or the start button in Windows 11, now also built with React Native. These things are all using React Native because turns out the developer experience building with React is pretty good, and JavaScript commanding the native layer on what to do is not particularly slow. But that's just Windows. What about Mac? Well, if I change this URL, React Native macOS, also Microsoft, there's a reason for this. Because Microsoft's goal is not just to fix building native apps on Windows, but make it so people are more likely to do it in the first place, themselves included. By making React Native work on both Windows and Mac, now they have a much happier path to build software that's pretty good for both platforms at once in the same code base. And they are actually doing this. A lot of modern Office software, like the Microsoft Office suite, is using React Native for Windows and for Mac, all maintained by Microsoft. Microsoft and the React team now work relatively closely to make sure React Native is constantly moving in a direction that benefits all of these platforms. The amount of money and time going into making React Native great is hard to fathom. That all said, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that React Native for Windows and Mac is a super easy thing for you to go set up and build an app with. They're getting there because their focus isn't making it really easy for somebody to spin up a new app. Their focus is making it so stable and reliable that Microsoft scales of software can be built on these platforms. And they've had a lot of success with it. I do genuinely believe the future is one where Microsoft recommends React Native as the way of building desktop apps for both. And I'm excited to see where that goes. There's an important point from chat, which is that both of them are missing their Expo, and I absolutely agree. If you don't know Expo, it is a set of tools that makes it way too easy to build native mobile apps using React Native. You run the CLI, you now have an environment working on your machine. You can simulate iOS or Android, or even run it on your actual phone by scanning a QR code. And when you're ready to deploy, you don't need to even own a Mac. You can set it all up through their Macs in their cluster, and it will deploy it all for you. It's super cool. I legitimately cannot fathom building a mobile app right now without using Expo. In a future where either they or another similar set of tools can support React Native on Windows and Mac, the future is going to be real bright there. And the main benefit for React Native, if you don't understand it, if it wasn't clear enough before, React Native doesn't render in a web view. It doesn't render inside of any browser, anything. React Native is just JavaScript code that tells the native platform what to do. So if you render a button with React Native for Windows, it will render a native universal Windows platform button. So it's not going to have the negatives of the web UIs. But remember this example I gave earlier? Just because it's not using a web layer doesn't mean it's faster. It might even end up being slower if you paint that natively. If you're using React Native for iOS and you're rendering a Swift UI output in the end, that might end up having the same performance issues that Daniel's Swift UI app had. But if you had rendered that in a web view, it might have been better. It's kind of crazy, but that's where we're at. The performance question isn't as simple as Electron bad, native good. There are so many layers here, and the reality is that the difference between these options isn't big enough to make a decision based on them. There are plenty of ways Electron is faster and slower. There's plenty of ways that React Native is faster and slower. There's plenty of ways that Real Native is faster and slower too. When we talk about these things, we need to be realistic about what the tools can and can't do, and realistic about what our users should and shouldn't be able to do as well. I don't know if I have anything else to say here. This has been quite a rant. I've had this in me for like 3 years now, give or take. Don't be too mean in the comments, guys. I just want to make sure that people don't get shit for building software that's important. And I guess I'll wrap this up with a shout out to the Electron team. There are few people in software that get as much shit as you guys do, despite doing something that is so good for the software ecosystem as a whole. To everyone helping maintain Electron and make it great, to everyone building software with Electron that is great, to everybody building the packages and ecosystem that makes this all possible, thank you, genuinely. You made it so I can move to Mac from Windows. You made it so my friends on Linux don't get left behind. You made it so people like me can ship not just good, but great software to every desktop platform, and you deserve nothing but praise for that. I am sorry you've gotten as much hate as you have. You do not deserve it. Let it come to me instead. Going forward, if you're going to hate on Electron, don't at them on Twitter, at me. I'm the one who will sit here and defend it because it's time. Stop talking shit on things you don't understand. Until next time, peace, nerds.